topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Connected Table Live. We're your hosts, Melanie Young and David Ransom, your insatiably curious culinary couple. We travel the world to bring you the amazing people, the thought leaders and legacies and movers and shakers who shape the world of food, wine, and hospitality. And we bring their stories to you and want you to get involved and expand your horizons and become active and support this amazing industry. With this show, we're launching a new series in the Connected Table Live called our Philanthropy Series. And we are going to be interviewing leading philanthropists who are really utilizing their connections and their strengths to make an impact. And goodness knows we need that now with so many things happening in the world. So this is an amazing charity we're going to be talking about. It celebrates 40 years. So we're going to take you back to when it started. Picture this. The year was 1984. I don't know about you, David, but I was dreaming of coming to New York. There was a famine raging in Ethiopia. You may know that that's when they did We Are the World. Bill Shore had been working as chief of staff for Gary Hart, who had an unsuccessful campaign for president. After the campaign's over, he was in that, what am I going to do with the rest of my life phase? Moved by the news about the famine, he decided he was going to start a nonprofit. Now, that is not easy to do.
Not at all.
Not at all. And he tapped someone he cares about, that he trusts, his sister, Debbie. And Bill and Debbie Shore, with guts, grit, and about $2,000 in cash, probably from a credit card or an ATM. I'm not sure, they'll tell us. They created an organization called Share a Strength. Share a Strength has become a major leader in hunger relief and fighting poverty, both on the global and national front. You're talking over $1 billion raised to provide hunger relief, mobilizing many leaders in all sorts of cross industries, including some very big, bold-faced names. And on the domestic front, the campaign called No Kid Hungry has helped to provide through over 374 million meals to school kids who otherwise may not have that nutrition that they need for the day, because one in five children still are facing food insecurity. So the thing is, we're going to celebrate all the successes that Share a Strength has done through its initiatives and talk about how it started with Billy and Debbie Shore, who join us today. And we're going to talk about the future as well, because we all know there's a famine in Gaza, there's a famine in Sudan. Poverty and hunger is pervasive. And we are the greatest country in the world. I hope everybody still thinks that. And as Bill has said, you can get food to people. It's just you've got to have the procedures and mechanisms in place. So we'd like to welcome to our show, as the first of our philanthropy series, Billy and Debbie Shore, founders of Share Our Strength. Welcome.
Thank you, guys. We're honored to be among the first in this new series, and I'm so glad you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's been something we've been dreaming about, and we're always trying to push the envelope further to think bigger and broader. And gosh, I personally have known your work and been involved with it, raising money through my work in New York, doing major events, and through the Taste of the Nation, which is really one of the great fundraisers of all times.
It sure is, Melanie. And I've actually been involved participating in the events over the years, back in the day, when my family poured our family's wine at Share Our Strength, Taste of the Nation in New York. And so it was one of my favorite events to attend and participate in every year back in the days that we did it. So it's lovely to have you folks on.
Thank you. So your brother and sister, you've been working together for a long time. Yeah. We're husband and wife. We've been working together for 20 years. We know it can be challenging. Where did y'all grow up? Talk to us about, little Debbie and little Billy and what your interests were.
Should have brought our baby pictures. We grew up in Pittsburgh. We grew up in this Jewish community called Squirrel Hill. and we went to public school, and that's where we grew up. And our father was a lawyer and a real public servant. Mom was mostly a stay-at-home mom, worked kind of on and off, but our dad was like very engaged in community service and local politics, which is probably where we got our sense for politics and community work.
Yeah, our father was actually the district administrative assistant and campaign manager for a congressman from Pittsburgh who served in Congress for 22 years. Our dad was with him the entire time. And so our dinner table conversation was always about what was going on. In those days, it was civil rights in Vietnam and then Watergate. But it was a very political, conversant household.
So is that what inspired? I know, Billy, you went into public service. Debbie, what did you go into? Tell us a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, so I studied philosophy and literature, but I also worked on the Hart campaign in the first campaign and the second campaign. Started out as a volunteer and then got on board. So I think so many, I don't know if Billy would say the same, he probably would, but so many of the lessons that we got growing up were, kind of subconscious, right? Like weren't really aware of all of the opportunities that you could do in the country and in the community. But as Billy said, listening to our dad and our mom and the neighbors would come over and talk about politics, and all that really makes an impact on you, has an impact on you, whether you realize it or not. And so like the Gary Hart campaign, the lessons we took from that campaign, and between that and growing up in a political household, I think we just had a lot of gems and a lot of wisdom when we started the organization.
Well, it certainly is a calling to service. I've always wanted to work on a political campaign. I've achieved a lot in my life, and I was ready to do it with Kamala Harris, but we were still moving to New Orleans. But hopefully in the future, because you can always do it at every stage and age of your life. Right. So, a lot of people say, I want to do something.
You'd have been involved, Melanie.
I would love to be. Nonprofit is my mother. My mother was very involved in the nonprofit world, and
as was mine.
And his mother, and both of our late mothers instilled service into everything we do. And I think every single program that I did in New York with multi-chef tasting events like Taste of the Nation, I worked with so many nonprofits. Everything had to have a purpose and to make a difference. It could not just be for profit. And I'm still that way. The show is like that too. It's very purposeful. So, a lot of people say, let's do something. I want to make a difference, but they don't necessarily act on it because it is a long, hard road. How did you get started? Bill, I referenced you had finished the campaign. So the Hart campaign's over. You're figuring out what you want to do next. You have this idea. How did you get that started and build it back when? Because I just heard the John Grisham interview. There was no right. modern technology.
Yeah. Well, Debbie said campaigns are fun, and when the campaign ended, I think we wanted to continue to not just have the fun, but have the the kind of the purpose-driven nature of it, the energy behind it, and particularly, I think we both felt that we had left the campaign with some very specific skills that we'd developed, or at least some experiences that we'd been exposed to in a political campaign. You have to know a little bit about fundraising. You have to know a little bit about the media. You have to know a little bit about organizing and community organizing. And as the Ethiopian famine in 1984, which was kind of the catalyst for us, took hold, we started to think about, can we bring some of these skills to an issue like this? And, campaigns are so intense for such a long period of time, and then they just end. You either win or you lose. And in our case, we lost. And so you're faced with this kind of, literally an existential question: what are we going to do with ourselves? And we wanted to do something that continued to feel meaningful and purposeful. But the lessons from the campaign, we really applied very directly to starting Share Our Strength. And the only other thing I would say about it is, now 40 years in, I'm sure Debbie has as well, have lots of folks that come to us with ideas to start things, and they don't know if they should hire a consultant or do a business plan or do a kind of an analysis of the competitive landscape. And my answer is always the same: if you want to do it, put a sign on the door, say you're starting, start to reach out to people and make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of brutal on this point because that's how we started, and I would say that's even how we started some of our more creative platforms for fundraising, without a lot of research. But I also feel like, you do need a few people that say, like, I think you're onto something. You do need some validation, which we got early on in the concept of Share Our Strength, which was, a very simple concept at the time. I don't know how much you remember about this, Melanie, but when we started the organization, the idea was we were going to put our logo on windows, restaurant windows, and ask the restaurateur to make a contribution to hunger. And it would sort of serve as a good housekeeping seal where people would, our very naive idea was that people would walk by the restaurant and say, oh, this restaurant's, involved in feeding hungry kids. And so we're going to patronize it. So we did that for a long time. I mean, that was really kind of the idea, was that we would get restaurants involved that way. But as it evolved, and as we, if you're truly open to hearing ideas, if you're truly open to trying things, then you won't stick to your knitting. You'll try new things. And so Taste of the Nation was a departure from the original idea, but one that made a lot of sense. And the other thing I'd just say when we started the organization that I always talk about as the three kind of core philosophies that we had almost immediately, Billy. I feel like from the very beginning, we believed that everybody has the strength to share in the fight against hunger. That was even before we named it that was the idea, that everybody has the strength to share. We wanted restaurants to be our first line of defense because they feed people for a living. And we believed then, and it's true today, that it would resonate with them. Hunger would resonate with them, and that they would act on it. I don't think we realized how very special and different and unique, those are the same thing, but how unique restaurateurs really are when it comes to community activism. They're really in a class of their own. And then third, we wanted to create what we consider new revenue that's not currently in the pipeline. So we didn't want to compete with food banks and other hunger groups. We wanted to create new money, which Taste of the Nation was a new, novel idea at the time. So those three things were kind of all simultaneously part of that core belief when we started the organization. And they've served us really well. And they're still, I think all three of those are still very much in play.
And I want to make sure we thank both of you for getting involved as early as you did, the way you described, because you got involved with us when,
nobody knew us.
Of a bet and a chance on us, and it made a big difference. It was really formative. So thank you.
Well, I just remember those events were a lot of fun, and a lot of good food and a lot of good wine was served. And I actually still have a umbrella that was given out by Tattinger Champagne at one of the events. And I still have the umbrella to this day, and I still use it.
Great.
Love that.
Hunger relief is important, and as I said, pervasive. As your organization has grown, 40 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Gosh, I think about all the things that have transpired. 40 years. Oh my God. You got started. You launched. I loved in the interview I just heard with John Grisham, I'm visioning, because I was there with starting a business at about the same time. There was just the phone book and the phone, and there wasn't, social media.
There were fax machines.
You wrote Alice Waters because you looked people up. Yeah. And as you were talking, I thought of how I was doing that for a lot of the things I was doing, whether it was James Spirit Awards or some of the 9,000 fundraisers I was doing. But you have to scale also. Because a nonprofit still has to run like a business at some point. How did you put the checks and balances in place, which are so critical with a nonprofit for reporting purposes, to be able to scale it beyond what you were doing?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, first of all, we had time to put the checks and balances in place because we grew very slowly. So not all 40 years have been like the last 35 or so. The early days were tough sledding. And we looked for ways to, we looked for kind of, today we would call them influencers that would be, kind of force multipliers for what we did. One of our lessons in Gary Hart's presidential campaign, when he ran in 1984 in the New Hampshire primary, was very critical to going on for the rest of the campaign. He ended up winning that primary, but he kept telling me, and I didn't know nearly as much about politics as he did, that, it was a campaign for 20 people. And if we got the right 20 people to be for us, then they would influence the next 20 and the next 20 and so forth, and we would win the primary. And we took that very, very literally, and it turned out to be correct. And so when we started Share Our Strength, it took us a little while to remember that lesson, but once we did, we started to reach out very selectively to folks, like I think Alice Waters was our first contributor, or one of our first contributors. And then we asked her to reach out to others on our behalf, and that started to kind of pick up some steam for us. But in the very early days, when you talk about pre-internet, you literally had to crank letters out one at a time.
Typewriter.
It was pre-internet, but there was the Apple Macintosh had just been invented, and Steve Wozniak, who invented it, was a Gary Hart supporter, and Debbie and I called him up and asked him if he would donate a Mac and a printer. They printed out letters like once every 6 minutes in those days, but it was still better than us typing them ourselves. So that kind of got us started.
As you were talking, Billy, I was thinking back to those were crazy early days, but our logo, we used to just be called SOS back in the early days, and we used a stencil, and colored it in and had it printed. That was our logo. And we just had a typewriter. So it was, it didn't feel that hard at the time. It felt like we were exactly where we should have been. But when you look back, it was obviously very hard and very slow.
Sometimes you think businesses and nonprofits have it a lot easier now, and it's easier to raise the money because you've got social media. However, raising money is still hard, particularly in tough economic times. And you did, I think you have done a great job creating partnerships. You created what we call the early influencers. The chefs were your early influencers before the word influencer was a word. But you also work with actors like Jeff Bridges, and I referenced John Grisham. You've harnessed the influential power and connections of people, which is really important to do when you're working on a cause and mission. Give us an example, some other things besides Taste of the Nation you're doing.
So talk about Chef Cycle, though.
A lot of the things we're doing still involve chefs, because even though we, kind of had our first 100 or first 200, we're now probably, closer to 25 or 30,000 restaurants at every level, at the fine dining level, which kind of took precedence for our first 20 years or so, but also multi-unit restaurants, casual dining chains, quick service. And we have programs now for every level of restaurant, which has changed the landscape for us. We always knew we needed to do that. We just didn't have the programs or ideas in place, but now we do. But yeah, Chef Cycle that Billy just mentioned is a great program. We just had our 10th anniversary this last year in Oregon, and it's what it sounds like. It's chefs riding, cycling for miles and miles and miles. About the first, 300 miles, we've dropped it down to 200 miles, but chefs ride 100 miles a day for 2 or 3 days. And what goes into the training over months, whether you're a trained cyclist or not, you still have to train, and it's really a challenge. So, we always say it's blood, sweat, and tears, and it literally is blood, sweat, and tears. But we brought together a couple hundred chefs, and they rode in a beautiful place. We raised $1 million last year. We're trying to double it for next year. Billy rides, which is amazing. I've never been on a bike, and it was my idea to start this. So I'm getting more and more grief from it every year from the chefs. But yeah, I've never been on a bike in my life. But I had this idea that it would be a great way, because I knew some chefs who cycled, and I thought that could be a new, and the bonding that takes place, the camaraderie, the relationships. We've had, marriages come out of it. We've had business partnerships come out of it. It's a very intense, fun, fulfilling, challenging, emotional experience. It really is. You guys should join us next year.
David cycles.
I bike almost every morning. About 5 days a week, I'm on the bike.
You will not escape my push.
I'm
noting that you're a cyclist.
I'm up at dawn. I don't do 100 miles a day. I will tell you that. But
but Billy did it. You can do it.
Anywhere between 10 and 20 each day is fine with me.
My pitch is, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I saw that on social media, and that's when I said, "Okay, I'm reaching out."
I think they're a great vehicle to get people together too. Because my brother did a when he lived in New Hampshire, he did a big bike ride with McDreamy, whatever that actor's name was.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the Dempsey Challenge.
Patrick
Yeah,
Dempsey.
the Dempsey
Yeah.
Challenge. So he did the
Yeah.
Dempsey Challenge for about 10 years and rode
Yep.
with Patrick Dempsey every day.
We're trying to
every
get
year.
him
Yeah.
to ride with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have some.
So-
We had Pink ride with us one year. Sing
Oh,
a
really?
song with Pink.
Fun.
Yeah,
Oh,
she
she's
rode.
great. Well,
Um,
she's from Pennsylvania also, right?
That's right. Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So it just shows you it's not just the chefs, it's everybody can get involved. I think that's
Yeah,
really
that's right.
important for
That's right.
this show to let anyone can get involved with Share a Strength, and there's a lot of different programs to do it. Because a lot of people will say, "Oh no, I can't do that," and for some people it is hard to write the big check to go to the gala.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's why it's important to have plenty of
Yeah.
other options as well.
Yeah.
Do this. Now, in 2010, Share a Strength started an initiative, a part of the organization called No Kid Hungry Campaign, which has had it has its own legs, as we say. And the goal here is to focus on ending childhood hunger, which I reference as 1 in 5 children, over 13 million kids still face food insecurity. Here in Louisiana, it's also a political problem. And, we're going to get into politics, but we know that there has been federal funding cuts and challenges. Here in Louisiana, the governor, I think last summer, cut summer school lunch budget. I mean, boom. And there are a lot of underserved children in this committee. So Isaac and Amanda Toops of Toops Meadery started a program making the meals and corralling people. And they served 70,000 this year for the summer school program, because otherwise these kids often, as this is their meal.
Yep.
So talk to us about the why behind why you decided to start it as an initiative within the organization, and where it has gone from here and where you're taking it. And also then how you're going back into doing more in the global arena. But let's start with No Kid Hungry.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we thought about a lot, and I would say for, many years, because of Taste of the Nation and some of the other things we've been speaking about, we were honestly known more for the entrepreneurial ways in which we generated revenues than what we actually did with them. And at some point that got a little bit unsatisfying, because, we were always doing good things with the money, but we were passing it on to other organizations, granting it out. They were doing good things, but it didn't have the power of everybody pulling in the same direction to accomplish a really big goal. And we thought about something that there's a writer who writes on social issues named Jonathan Kozol, and he always talks about picking battles that are big enough to matter, but small enough to win. And so we really asked ourselves, what would that be in our world? What's big enough to matter, but small enough to win? Because hunger, it exists internationally. It exists across all demographics and populations. But we thought when it came to kids in the United States who were hungry on a chronic basis, that was big enough to matter and small enough to win. And that it was, in fact, a solvable problem, because as we all know, we don't have shortages of food in the United States, and we don't have shortages of food programs. And so we started to look at programs that were already existing, but that were under-enrolled, or there were barriers to participation. The best example is probably that 22 million kids in the country get a free or reduced price school lunch, and all 22 million are eligible for breakfast as well. But when we started looking at this in 2010, only 9 million of the 22 million were getting breakfast. And that's because, at lunch, they're already there. Breakfast, they have to get to school earlier. There were these kind of logistical barriers that really didn't make any sense relative to the value of kids getting the meals. And so we started to knock those down in different ways, moved breakfast from the cafeteria to the classroom in thousands of schools and school districts across the country. And again, leveraged, the meals themselves are 100% federally reimbursed, part of the school lunch program that was started in 1946 when generals and admirals came back from World War II and said to Congress and the American people that our troops were not healthy and fit and strong enough by the end of the war, so we should start feeding kids in school. That's where this really all began. So as we looked at it, we realized that, there was such leverage. If we could knock down some of these barriers, these dollars that have bipartisan support would flow. And we ended up having, tremendous success with that. We're not done yet, but I think we have a line of sight to getting to a point in this country where we don't have kids who are hungry. That they still may be poor, they still may have other issues related to poverty, but they need not be hungry.
Yeah, Bill, you were just giving the statistic about the numbers of kids who are eligible for lunch and also for breakfast, but not getting at the 8 or 9 million that we're not getting it out of the 20. And in summer, only 3 million of those 20 million were getting it. So, and that takes us into another whole level of what Share Our Strength has been able to accomplish over the last year or so with summer meals. If we're ready to talk about that, because that to me has been one of the biggest accomplishments that we've been able to claim as being out front with other hunger groups, but really in a leadership role of getting summer meals available in rural America for the first time without having to eat in congregate, which has always been the policy, but opening that up in rural America so kids can pick up a meal or get them dropped off. And that has just changed the landscape. And I think I think we went from 3 million to 13 million, if that's right, Bill, that are now getting summer meals.
Yep.
Because of this legislation that the hunger community and Share Our Strength helped get passed.
It's really important. We have a global audience. So I think I just want to pause here and say that, that we may have viewers and listeners who completely do not understand how children don't have breakfast and lunch, because it's not heard of in Italy or France and stuff, but it is a problem because, of poverty, because a lot of the households are single mothers.
Yep.
There's an absent father. You mentioned something school starts earlier. Transportation, getting to school for a lot of these people is, you got to get on that bus early. So the meals just may not be available due to limits of time, money. The mom has to get to work, et cetera. And as well as funding cuts, particularly in the summer when they're not in school.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But those are manageable logistical challenges. There's a congressman named Jim McGovern from Massachusetts that always says hunger is a political condition. And again, it's not about shortages of food, at least in this country. Hunger in America is a political condition. When we have the political will, when we decide that we want to kind of connect these dots and eliminate these barriers, kids can get fed. And everything else that you would hope would happen when they get fed does happen. They attend school on a more regular basis. Their grades are better. Their disciplinary infractions are down. Their visits to the nurse's office are down. It has a big ripple effect.
It's a win-win for everybody.
It is. And they're healthier kids. They're going to grow up healthier, which is really, really important. So you brought something up I think is important. When I worked with a major nonprofit, I won't say the name, but it was a big one. We always toted how much money, and this is important. The PR machine was, we raised all this money. And then somebody always would say, well, where's the money going? How is it being used? And that has to be a very succinct, very direct answer and response. So how do you answer that to the people who say, okay, you raised $1 million, you raised $3 million. How and is the money allocated and funneled into the communities and organizations that need it?
Yeah, well, the first thing we do is we, try to get people to pay attention to the impact that we're having. And people obviously want their funds to be used efficiently and effectively, but efficiently and effectively to a purpose, to a specific, end goal or outcome. And so, we know that we've added 3 million kids to the school breakfast program. We know that, per Debbie's point, we've added 10 million kids to summer meals. These are big numbers. In fact, when we back them all out, when we back out the number of meals that we know kids have been able to receive with the dollars we've spent against it, it turns out that about $1 unlocks about 10 meals. Now, $1 doesn't pay for 10 meals because we don't pay for food. We do the kind of things we were describing earlier in terms of getting schools to participate in the school meals program and so forth. But there's a real, obviously, efficiency there and a leverage there to $1 unlocking 10 meals. And a lot of our funds are spent in grants to community partners. I think of Share Our Strength as almost like a general contractor with a lot of subcontractors who have the expertise on the ground in New Orleans, on the ground in Philadelphia, on the ground in Omaha, Nebraska, organizations that are either working in the community. Sometimes they're working with food banks and food pantries. Sometimes, more typically in our case, they're working with school districts and making sure the school districts have everything they need, all the equipment they need. We talked about the meals being 100% federally reimbursed, but if you add 3 million kids to school breakfast, schools are going to need more refrigeration, more transportation, more staffing. That's what Share Our Strength dollars go to.
I don't think people realize how important transportation is to this quotient, because so many
Yes.
people who live in poverty don't live in some are in an inner city, but a lot of them, we've traveled a lot to rural areas.
And just in terms of scale too, I think since 2020, we've funded about 3,000 organizations, local, state, and nationals. And it just gives you an idea of how many organizations at every level that Share Our Strength is funding. About $100 million went into 3,000 nonprofits. So.
How did the pandemic affect you? I mean, it affected everybody. And the first thing I'm thinking, I was just talking to Drew Newport, who's got a new book out, and it killed his restaurants.
He's an original Share Our Strength supporter from way like one of our very first in New York.
His new book out is fabulous.
Is it like a memoir?
It's coming out in a couple of weeks. He's going to be on this show the 22nd. I called him yesterday to say, it just really hit home. He mentions Share Our Strength in there at the Taste of the Nation.
Yeah. I gotta see it. That's great.
So, but it made me think, oh my God, they were closed down. They lost everything and they had to reopen. And so much of what they do in the restaurant world and it related, the suppliers, you name it, their largesse was sent to hunger relief. A lot of their charitable. So how did that impact, and how did you pivot to get through it?
It really had a huge impact. It was in a way, it was a double hit given some of the things that we've just spoken about. So, a lot of our revenue in the organization and our contributions are tied to the restaurant industry, and all the restaurants either closed or had significant challenges of their own. And our delivery system for so much of what we do is the schools, and the schools were all closed. So how do you get school meals to kids when the schools are closed for months on end? So it became a very big challenge, and we pivoted in a couple of ways. One was that I guess one maybe good thing that happened was people became more aware of the hunger issue than they had before. As jobs were lost and as businesses closed down, people saw images in Atlanta and San Antonio and other places of long lines of cars, sometimes 1,000 cars lined up at a food bank. And it gave people the sense of, a lot of people's lives are pretty fragile economically. They're only maybe one step away from needing food assistance for themselves. 60% of all the people that needed food assistance during the pandemic, it was the first time in their entire lives that they'd ever had to ask for help in that way. So it really created a new awareness of the hunger issue, and people responded very, very generously. We had this very unexpected, very large spike in revenues because people wanted to do something that would help. The other thing that happened was Congress passed a number of laws that we had been asking for a long time to make it more efficient and more effective for us to feed kids. There were all these regulations in place that just kind of slowed everything down. And during the pandemic, they waived all of that. Some of them are kind of arcane examples, so I won't bore you with them. But it enabled us to actually do a lot of the things that we've been arguing for, and many of those things stayed in place after the pandemic. So as terrible as the pandemic was, it really created some energy around this notion that you could actually solve the hunger problem.
It was so amazing, though. I think about the restaurants that were feeding people while they were going under as a restaurant. I mean, they were still the most generous, hospitable, gracious, helpful people you can imagine. It's really true. Mm-hmm. And we actually did some granting to chefs around the country, maybe 5 or 6. I can't remember all of them, but in several markets, there were chefs who were struggling, but they wanted to feed their community. So we were giving grants out to chefs who were staying open and paying their staff so they could make food for the community. And that was happening in New York, was happening in Connecticut, one in California, a couple others around the country. So, I mean, as tough as it was for the restaurants, they were like still stepping up, which is just incredible. It says a lot about the industry.
It does. It's a wonderful industry to be in. And often they get tapped out too much. I always felt like I got to the point where I couldn't do another ask. I had to pull back because I was feeling bad because everybody was struggling up and down and up and down. So we've been talking about the domestic front and the progress being made, but there's always challenges. It still continues because everything just seems to be changing all the time right now. What are you doing on the international front now? Just to bring it full circle, Share Our Strength started because there was a famine in Ethiopia. Here we are again. I think I was researching famine to understand what a famine was, because I don't think a lot of people understand what a famine is. And there's criteria for a famine. And I know that we have now, Gaza has now reached famine, and Sudan has a famine. A lot of people turn it off. Sadly, there's a lot of people who are cynical who say, I can't do anything about it. It's Africa. I can't deal with it. There's unfortunately a lot of people who say, it's not in my backyard. I can't deal with it. What do you want to say to them? And what are you doing on the international scale now that is different and going forward you're looking at?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you raised the Gaza crisis, because it's, we're all looking at it every day, and it's just so heartbreaking. We don't really do a lot of emergency funding anymore internationally. We'll get into one that we are working on. But in Gaza, there's two organizations that are doing great work, and I'll just let you know who they are so your listeners can hear. One is World Central Kitchen, who's on the ground there, and I'm sure some days getting through and some not, but they are able to get emergency relief through. And the other is one that we just became aware of called EDESIA, EDESIA, and they are providing emergency the Plumpy Nut supplement and sending it into Africa, actually sending it to 60 countries, including Gaza. And it's a life-saving and prevention product. Plumpy Nut that they're manufacturing in the United States and shipping over. So those are two organizations that are getting through in Gaza and in other countries where there is famine and hunger and starvation. So we have been looking at where we can, instead of only granting a small amount of money, which is really, our demands domestically are such that we can't give that much internationally, but we've always given a little bit internationally. So we just started to think about, are there other things we can do to increase the revenue and increase the impact that we're having internationally? And so we could just kind of landed on this idea of like, what can we transfer from our work that works? Are there things in the culinary industry that could work in another country? So we ended up in India for a lot of reasons that so far are making a lot of sense. I'm headed for my 8th trip on Saturday back to India, where I'm actually speaking to a big hospitality conference in Goa. And it'll be my first time in front of a lot of restaurateurs, which will be great. Because what we're doing is similar to what we've done here, where we're doing taste events and dinners and finding ways for the culinary industry to step up, make a difference, collaborate with each other, learn from each other, raise money and awareness for school meals in India. Their programs are very different from ours in that they don't have kitchens in their schools as much as they have big community kitchens that service the school district, right? So as many as, we helped build a kitchen in Nagpur, which is a city in Maharashtra, same state as Bombay. And that feeds 20,000 kids, but we raised enough money to open it and start serving in Nagpur. So they have these wonderful community kitchens that crank out 20, 30, 40, 50,000 meals a day and deliver them into the school system. And the kids have, and with no packaging, which is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. No packaging at all. Steel vats, they go back and they steam clean them and then start working. They work it's a 24-hour work process. And then the kids have like their bowls and their forks and their spoons, and those get washed, and they get brought back out the next day. And that's how a lot of kids are fed in India. And there's lots of kids. I mean, there's 88 million or so. There's 140 million who are eligible for a school meal in public school. And there's like 88 million that are not getting regular daily nutritious meals. And so our work there, it kind of just the playbook of Share Our Strength, going back to how we started here and getting chefs involved. And just like Alice Waters put us in touch with chefs, and we got Stephen Powell's in Dallas and Susan Spicer in New Orleans, and Alan Susser in Miami. Exact same thing is happening in India. We're working with chefs in Mumbai and Delhi and Calcutta and Bangalore and Goa, because this notion of, and I think particularly with chefs, yes, everybody has a strength to share, but when you tell a chef that they can play a role in hunger, they're going to step up. And so it's resonated with them exactly the way it's resonated here. And so that's what we're doing in India, is thinking through how do we transfer our what has been successful here. It will be a little bit different culture, different business, different industry, different everything, different economy, but that instinct for a chef to do something with kids is very much alive. And so building a stronger pipeline for school meals is what we're looking at right now, and adding 1 million kids in the next couple of years to the school meals program, and then thinking about where else that could work.
Very impressive.
That's what I've been thinking about as you've been talking. Because it's great. Create the playbook and take the playbook elsewhere, much like a franchise.
Yeah,
and
the playbook it's foundational, right? It's not exact. I mean, everything you have to. What I struggle with is knowing what I know, which is a lot from Share Our Strength. I mean, 40 years here and understanding what works, with what I don't know, which is a lot that I don't know. In India. So there's that constant, push pull.
And also adapting to the local culture, because
the variables involved.
There are a lot of variables, cultural variables involved, and what you can eat and don't eat, and treatment of women, for example. I mean, it's difficult.
Well, even on a less serious note than that, but at our food and wine events, like a lot of places where we can't even drink alcohol because they're very religious and Hindu, and there's alcohol allowed and stuff like that. But there's adjustments to be made. But again, that instinct to serve, and that instinct to have food at the center of that is very strong.
Have you had as much groundswell of support from the wine and spirits industry as you have from the restaurant industry?
I mean, yes, we've had a great response, but I think dollar for dollar wouldn't match the restaurant contribution, which I have somewhere around, and it's just like the way I add it up in my head when I think of all the things we've done, somewhere around $500-600 million from the restaurant industry, all in from all of our different campaigns over the years. I mean, because as Billy said, like the first 5 years we weren't raising that much, but in the last 30 to 35 years were the bulk of the money, and really in the last 20, I'd say, since the launch of the No Kid Hungry campaign, where we significantly increased our exposure, our brand strength, and our revenue.
We just have to stick around for the next 30 years now.
Well, let's talk about that. What is in your crystal ball? I want each of you to talk about that.
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned, we knew this early on in a way. We had a tagline in the early days of Share Our Strength that said it takes more than food to fight hunger. And the point of it was that hunger is really a symptom of a set of deeper problems. It's a problem in and of itself, and we can address it, but it's also a symptom of poverty and lack of opportunity. And so to start to think about how to get to the root causes of why kids and families experience hunger, and the root causes of why we've had poverty in this country for so long. It has gotten better, no doubt about it, but it still exists, and it's more complicated than getting kids to school on time or getting breakfast served in a classroom. Those are kind of logistical challenges, but it's important for us to turn our attention to it. So I think between what Debbie's described in terms of our international opportunities and ambitions, and what I'm describing in terms of organizations starting to think about how do you get to some of the root causes. We're currently focused on a cohort of single moms. About 60% of the kids in the United States who live in poverty live in families, households headed by single moms. So they have a whole set of needs of their own that we're trying to think through how to best address, mostly by going into communities and listening to them and partnering with them. But I think that is kind of the next evolution of what we're about, and it'll always be in service of ending hunger in this country, but we can't end hunger only with food. We're going to have to get to some of these other issues.
Yeah, and single mothers do have incredible challenge. The cost of childcare is up,
Oh.
So that's one of the biggest problems everywhere is where do if they're not in school, and if you've got a young child, what do you do? It's easier to stay home and draw unemployment.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, we have SNAP programs and EBT that help, but, we don't know we never know in the crystal ball what's going to be cut and what's going to be funded.
Right. I mean, there has been a strong bipartisan. My sister has come in here to visit with us.
My computer totally died. I am so sorry. So now
Now you're together. That's so nice.
Sorry.
There you
Keep
go.
going.
Dang that technology.
Yeah. So, this is kind of new territory for us, and we have a lot to learn in it. But there has been the good thing, and we've just touched on this, but we haven't really talked about it. We're obviously living through a difficult time politically in terms of the cuts that some of these programs will experience. But there has been a kind of a core of bipartisanship that's existed around these programs for a long time. So we'll have to deal with cuts to SNAP and so forth. But I don't think we're going to, when you think of like what's going on internationally with USAID, right? That was an existential, disaster for USAID. It really doesn't exist anymore. We're not going to face that type of existential disaster because we do have bipartisan support, and because kids are a common ground, I think, for a lot of Americans to rally around. Many of us just have, some sense of wanting to protect children. And I think that'll serve us well.
Well, I'm a big believer in you may not like what's happening, and we certainly don't. We don't want to see federal funding cut for a lot of things that we truly believe in, whether it's hunger relief and helping people, the arts, you name it. But if you're not happy, don't go hide about it. Go say, I want to do something.
Yes.
Because the pendulum will switch. It's not forever. So you just got to figure out how to deal with it now and get stronger groundwork so that you can move forward.
I was gonna say I have a plug for another future activity if you want to hear it.
Yes.
So 2028, the Los Angeles Olympics, we're planning to bring in 50 of the best chefs from around the world to do a series of culinary events to raise money for world hunger and stuff for for No Kid Hungry, but to focus on not just the U.S. but around the globe and bringing in chefs from all over the country. We'll do a grand tasting. We'll do private dinners, maybe a chef competition, all kinds of stuff. So that's going to be a fun one. And that's, that'll be here before we know it.
Well, giving us our backgrounds, that is the most exciting thing we've heard. That's just great.
Well, we
were hoping to do that in the Milan. I've been trying to do that in Milan, but it's hard to come. We don't speak Italian. But Los Angeles.
You want to do for the Winter Olympics, right? For 26, you're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we haven't made much inroads getting connections there. So
we've got to rope you into this.
Yeah, we'll rope you in.
But, the other thing you just said was so important, because it is important for people to lift up their voices and to be heard on these issues. And I think every time somebody does, it gives a little bit more permission and a little bit more courage to the next person to say something as well. And in the categories of sharing strength, as you said at the beginning, Melanie, not everybody can write a big check for a gala, but everybody could write a letter to the editor. Everybody could write to their member of Congress or meet with their governor or get involved with their school district. And those things add up to a real critical mass of people saying, we're going to find ways to feed kids.
You don't have to give money. You can give time, or you can give intelligence, or write the letter.
Yeah.
Just
expertise, networking. You have a lot of people have a lot of expertise to share. So you could tap into that as well.
Yeah, saying silence doesn't make progress. Listening is good, speaking out is good, but doing nothing and just saying, it's not my problem. It is everybody's problem, because it is a civilization, and it's the future. We think what you're doing is awesome. I mean, we've been longtime supporters. I'm very excited about the Los Angeles Olympic thing, because that sounds like a whole nother level of excitement. We got to get something done in New Orleans. I mean, we have a lot of global contacts around the world because we do so much in the wine. That's why I asked you about wine. And hopefully our audience, who we have particularly in Europe, will see this and understand that the opportunities are there to do something in their countries as well. I mean, the fact you're doing this in India, which is not an easy country, amazing.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, it's so nice to be reconnected with both of you. Wow.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for responding to the email. So let's wrap this up by saying where our listeners can find and follow you, and one final wonderful inspiration from you about what you're doing.
Yeah, well, you know, like most organizations, our website is a good place to start, nokidhungry.org. We have two websites, nokidhungry.org and shareourstrength.org, and they connect to each other. There you find the full kind of panoply of the things we're involved in, the program activities, the fundraising activities, ways that you can make a difference. And I think people, you know, a lot of people learn about us that way, and we'll be very responsive to anybody that reaches out. And I think, you know, the thing that I think for Debbie and myself, I'll let Debbie speak for herself, but one of the things that's been so sustaining is this notion of how, in terms of like what's inspiring for me, Melanie, is this notion that sharing strength can be so empowering. You know, we constantly hear from chefs, restaurateurs, and others, you know, one of the kind of the common refrains is, I didn't realize I could make a difference, you know, just by being a chef. And we think, well, like just by being a chef, that's a really big deal in our world. You know, there's nothing just about that. You know, these are heroes to us. But, you know, at the end of the day, more people have to feel empowered to be able to make a difference in their community. And to the extent that we can be the vehicle for that, you know, every time it happens with somebody, and it happens pretty frequently now as we've grown, I get kind of re-inspired to kind of keep that going.
You know, and when you feed kids, you feed the future.
Yeah,
So
That's right.
well,
you have to think
I
of
just got the notice
of
it's
the next
time.
generation as well.
It's time. So we're gonna have to wrap this up. We've been talking. Thank you for your time
Thank
and
you.
your inspiration and all you do. We're inspired,
Mm-hmm.
and we're all about eat, drink, explore, inspire here. So you've been listening to the Connected Table Live with Melanie Young and David Ransom. Our guests have been Billy Shore and Debbie Shore, the co-founders of Share Our Strength and their initiative called No Kid Hungry. You can go to shareourstrength.org, nokidhungry.org to learn more. And we always encourage you to stay insatiably curious, but also it's, you know, instead of just opening your mouth and feeding yourself, open your mouth and speak out if you want to make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Great to see you.